I was late for a meeting with my boss because I helped a client on the road, and I know how that sounds. Like an excuse you'd tell yourself to feel noble while your life is on fire. But this isn't a story about feeling noble. It's about the 10 minutes that took a wrench to everything I thought was solid, and then somehow tightened the bolts I didn't know were loose. It was 8:43 a.m. when the first message lit up my screen. 9 sharp. Don't be late. That was Ben, my boss, the kind of man who speaks in deadlines, not sentences. At 8:44, I was already in the car, tie knotted crooked because the mirror in my hallway leans left, coffee cooling in the cup holder, slides rehearsed in my head, quarterlies, churn, the quietly sinking ship we were going to insist was sailing just fine. I had 21 minutes to make a 17-minute drive and 4 minutes to pretend I slept. The sky had that Monday color to it, a thin, exhausted gray. The highway shoulder glittered with yesterday's glass. I remember all of it because nerves turn you into a camera. I remember the hum of the tires, the way my phone buzzed against the console like a trapped bee, the text preview from Lydia in finance, Ben's already pacing, and the way my thumb hovered over "I'm 5 out" before I decided to keep my lie to myself. I was in the right lane, half a mile from exit 12, when the hazard lights appeared. Orange squares flashing where the shoulder narrows under the overpass. The first car swerved late. The second overcorrected. And for a second I watched the whole morning bend toward disaster. By the time I pulled alongside, I was already braking. The sedan was silver under a skin of road dust. The rear tires sagged like a deflated lung. The driver's door was open just enough to show a leg in black slacks, a white shirt, hands struggling with a jack that didn't want to cooperate. I wouldn't have stopped if I'd only seen the car. I stopped because of the suitcase. Hard-sided, navy, propped open on the passenger seat, papers bristling from a leather folder like a porcupine of to-do lists. I saw a company badge clipped to the handle. I saw the face on it and blinked without understanding why it felt familiar. The wind shoved at my tie as I stepped out. Trucks ripped past, shivering the air. The driver looked up once, quick, a glance you give a stranger when you've already decided you'll refuse help because refusing is easier than depending. "You okay?" I said. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers were pink with cold and effort. The jack had chewed the metal lip and slipped. The car rested crooked, 1 inch off the ground, and a lifetime from safety. "I have a meeting," she said finally, voice steady in that brittle way that only breaks later. "I just need the jack to catch." I knew that tone. I'd heard it in our lobby and elevators, in the quiet outside conference rooms, where people rehearse not asking for what they need. "Let me," I said, crouching. "Your tire iron's wrong for the lugs. I've got one that fits." She glanced at my tie, at the time on my watch, at the traffic. She didn't say yes. She just moved aside, which was yes enough. Under the overpass, it smelled like wet concrete and oil. My palms came away black on the first try. The jack had been set against a seam that looked right but wasn't. The metal kept sliding. I repositioned it 3 times while the world roared by, while my phone kept vibrating like a tiny, angry heart. When it finally bit and the car lifted true, she exhaled like someone had been holding her underwater. I popped the hubcap with the heel of my hand, lined the iron, cracked the first lug with a grunt I hope didn't sound like showing off. "Thank you," she said, and only then did we exchange names. "I'm Mara." "Evan!" The 4th lug screamed, then loosened. By then the cold had found the gap between my cuff and my skin. A gust pushed grit into my eyes, and I blinked tears I pretended were only wind. I swapped the tire fast, shoulder against rubber, weight against fear, tightened in a star pattern the way my father taught me in a driveway that smelled like grass and soap. I spun the jack down with my wrist, my watch face smearing a crescent of dirt. Time did its math while we worked. 8:51, 8:54, 8:57. Every minute a bead of sweat under my collar. Every turn of the iron a decision I kept remaking. "Where are you headed?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag that lived under my trunk mat for reasons exactly like this. "Downtown," she said, eyes on the suitcase, on the papers she kept checking like a rosary. "A contract review. If I miss it, it gets pushed a week, and if it gets pushed a week—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. You can hear a cliff in someone's voice. I took the hint and didn't ask more. The wheel kissed asphalt. I torqued the last nut, then stood. A fine tremor ran through my fingers, part adrenaline, part caffeine that never got to do its job. I looked at her badge again, and the flicker of recognition nagged me harder. I knew that logo. I'd seen it on invoices on the slide I'd put third because second felt too eager, and fourth felt like we were hiding. "Do you work with—" I started, then cut myself off. The lane hissed with passing tires. Mara closed the suitcase with a clean, decisive snap. "Let me pay you," she said, already digging for a wallet. "Or at least, don't," I said. "Just don't drive on the spare longer than you have to. It's a donut. 60 miles an hour. No heroic lane changes." Her mouth did a small, surprised smile that looked like it didn't get much practice. She glanced at my hands again, then at my car, then at my face like she was memorizing it. "You're going to be late for whatever you were racing to," she said. "I already am," I said, and my phone answered for me, buzzing with Ben's name across the glass in a tone I reserved for smoke alarms. I silenced it. She watched me do it, and something in her expression softened in a way that made the whole stupid morning feel like maybe I hadn't miscalculated as badly as it felt. "Thank you, Evan," she said again, and this time it landed. She got in. The engine caught, the hazards went dark, she merged clean and was gone, leaving the smell of rubber and the press of wind and the feeling in my chest, like I'd stepped off a ledge and landed somehow on something that held. I got back in my car at 9:02 with dirt under my nails and a pulse in my throat. The dashboard clock glared. I floored it to the limits of my conscience and the highway's tolerance. The city rose ahead, all glass and angles, the kind of skyline that makes you think progress is a straight line. I rehearsed explanations that collapsed the second I said them in my head. I rehearsed silence. I decided on the truth and felt how heavy it was. When the elevator doors opened on 14, I caught my reflection, tie crooked, smudge on my cheekbone I missed. The bullpen was too bright. The air tasted like printer heat. Lydia looked up with that wide-eyed warning that says, "Turn around, but there's nowhere to go." Ben's office door was open like a mouth. Inside, the screen showed my deck on the first slide, the title that had taken me 6 drafts to make sound both confident and not delusional. The conference table was full. Sales, ops, 2 people from legal, and Sharon from the client's side. Chin lifted, expression that said she'd been here long enough to be disappointed. Ben didn't stand. He didn't need to. His eyebrows did the talking. 9 sharp, he said, voice like a ruler slapped against a desk. "And yet here you are." I put my phone face down on the table. The vibration still hummed against the laminate. I met his eyes and said the only sentence I had left that wouldn't rot in my mouth. I was late because I helped someone on the road. The silence that followed was the kind you only hear in offices, the kind padded with carpet and policy and 100 unspoken judgments. Someone coughed. Someone clicked a pen. Ben's smile was the kind that shows enamel, not warmth. "Let's begin," he said, and the meeting did what meetings do. It started pretending nothing human had happened on the way here. The highway should have carried me like a conveyor belt straight into downtown, straight into that conference room where I was supposed to prove I could keep this job. Instead, it shoved me into a scene that felt stolen from someone else's bad morning. The rain had started as a mist, just heavy enough to smear across the windshield when the wipers passed. By the time I saw the hazard lights under the overpass, it was a curtain, the kind of rain that makes you taste iron in the air, that turns shoulders of the road into rivers of oil and grit. Her car sat tilted, the rear tire collapsed against the rim, a pale halo of steam rising from the hood. She was crouched near the wheel, hair plastered flat, both hands on a jack that wasn't biting. The red of her blouse was so bright against the gray morning it looked almost cruel. One high heel lay on the ground beside her, like it had been kicked off in surrender. Trucks whipped by, spraying arcs of dirty water that slapped her back. She didn't flinch, didn't even look up, just kept trying, jaw tight, arms trembling. I slowed before I even decided. My brain screamed about the time, about Ben pacing that office like a vulture already circling, about every consequence waiting on the 14th floor. But my body was already pulling to the shoulder. When I opened my door, the storm punched me sideways. My tie snapped against my cheek, shoes sinking into the muck. I called out, but the wind stole the word. I had to get close. She startled when I knelt beside her, eyes wide with the stubborn kind of fear people get when they're not sure if you're a threat or a lifeline. "You'll strip the frame if you keep at it," I said, reaching for the jack. My fingers brushed hers, cold as stone. "Here, let me." For half a second she hesitated, protective over the only tool she had, but then she let go. The relief in her shoulders was almost invisible, but it was there. I dragged the jack to the right point, metal grinding, and pushed with my weight until the car lifted. She exhaled like someone had been holding her lungs hostage. I popped my trunk and pulled out the cross wrench I kept from college days, back when every problem was solved with borrowed tools and luck. The lugs were stubborn. My palm slipped once, skin peeling just enough to sting. But I leaned in, rain plastering my shirt to my back, until each one cracked loose with a sharp metallic groan. The spare came free from her trunk after a fight with the rusted latch. By then we were both soaked, streaked with road grit, hair dripping into our eyes. "You didn't have to stop," she said finally, voice almost swallowed by the traffic. "Didn't feel right not to," I muttered, wedging the spare into place. She crouched beside me, holding the flashlight from her phone, trying to shield it from the rain with her hand. Her nails were immaculate, deep burgundy, now chipped at the edges. "I've got a meeting I can't miss," she said. I almost laughed, bitter and tired. "Me too." The wheel kissed asphalt again, bolts tightened in a neat star. My watch said 8:58. My stomach dropped through the pavement. She pressed the phone closer so I could see. For a heartbeat, her face was only inches from mine. Not makeup perfect anymore, mascara streaked, lips pale, but honest, tired, determined. She looked like someone who had been fighting alone too long and didn't know how to stop. "Thank you," she whispered, almost drowned in the hiss of passing cars. I wiped my hands on the rag from my trunk, though it did nothing but spread the black. "Just get there safe," I said. She snapped her suitcase closed, shoved it back onto the seat, and slid behind the wheel. Her eyes caught mine one last time through the glass before the wipers smeared the moment away. Then the hazards went dark, and she was gone, swallowed by the river of red taillights. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, rain soaking through to my bones, before I remembered where I was supposed to be. The elevator ride stretched like punishment. Each floor dinged too slowly, my reflection in the steel door growing darker with every number. By the time it opened on 14, I'd rehearsed a dozen explanations and killed them all in my throat. None survived the air. The bullpen hit me like a spotlight, too bright, too sharp, smelling of toner and the sweat of people pretending not to sweat. Heads turned. Some looked down fast, suddenly fascinated with keyboards. Others let their smirks linger just long enough to sting. Lydia from finance half lifted her brows in that "you're dead" expression, then ducked behind her monitor. Ben's door was wide open, always was. He believed walls were for weak managers. His voice carried even before I stepped inside. "Nice of you to join us," he said without looking up. The table was full. Ops, sales, legal, even Sharon from the client's side with her notebook, open like a courtroom transcript. My deck glowed on the screen behind him, still stuck on slide 1. The room was waiting, watching, feeding. I moved to the empty chair at the far end. My shirt was still damp, collar wilted, streak of grime smeared across my cuff where I'd wiped my hands. I could feel it all, magnified under their eyes. Ben finally glanced up. His smile was surgical. "We said 9 sharp. Do you not own a watch, Evan?" I swallowed. My voice came out low. No, he cut me off, palm flat on the table. Don't. I don't want to hear the dog ate your homework. I want to know if I can trust you to represent this company without making us look like amateurs. The silence that followed wasn't silent. It was full of the clicking of pens, the shuffle of papers, the quiet hum of someone's throat clearing just to fill the void. Sharon tilted her head, lips tight, eyes sliding over me like I was an unpolished floor she didn't want to step on. Someone from sales chuckled under his breath, just enough for me to hear. I said 9 sharp. Ben repeated, softer now, which was worse. He leaned back, hands steepled, eyes fixed on me like he was measuring whether I was worth the oxygen in the room. "You think clients care about your excuses?" I shook my head. My pulse was a hammer. "No." "Good. Then stop having them." He turned to the screen. "Let's continue." The deck advanced. My deck. My voice was supposed to guide it, but Ben took over, skimming through numbers like they were his. My work shrank in his mouth, flattened, stripped of the urgency I'd threaded into it. Every now and then he threw in a jab without turning his head. Of course, the data here would be stronger if someone had managed to arrive on time. Or, these projections are optimistic. Again, not unlike certain people's sense of punctuality. Laughter rippled, polite but sharp enough to cut. I sat still, fists pressed under the table, nails digging into my palm. When the presentation ended, Ben closed his laptop with a snap that felt like a verdict. Meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped, people stood, voices rose in casual chatter, already forgetting I existed. But Ben wasn't done. He lingered, eyes following me as the room emptied. "Evan," he said, tone light, almost conversational. "This company doesn't reward martyrs. It rewards results. Remember that." I nodded once. My mouth tasted like rust. Out in the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed louder than the chatter around me. Lydia caught my eye, mouthed, "I'm sorry," then vanished into her office. By the time I reached my desk, my inbox had already bloomed with polite daggers. Subject lines like "follow up" and "next steps" from people who'd sat in that room, watched me drown, and moved on without throwing a rope. My chair squeaked when I sat. I stared at my hands. Black grit still clinging under my nails. Proof of where I'd been, of what I'd done. Proof no one in this building would ever care about. And yet, somewhere out there in the city, a woman was driving on a spare tire because I'd stopped. Somewhere that mattered. But not here. Not to Ben. Not to anyone who just saw me as late. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the office breathe. The first email hit before my jacket dried. Performance alignment. Today 11:30 A. Subject line from HR, CC'd to Ben. The body was 3 sentences that managed to say everything and nothing. Confirm attendance. Bring laptop. Discuss expectations moving forward. I stared at it until the words stopped meaning anything. Then a second calendar tile slid into place. Ben's touchpoint, immediate. No location, just my office. He was already standing when I walked in, hands on the back of his chair like he was considering whether to throw it. The blinds were half closed, striping the room in gray. On his desk sat a printed copy of my deck, edges freshly guillotined, a stack of sticky notes bleeding highlighter. "We'll keep this short," he said. "I don't have time to babysit." He didn't motion to the chair. I stayed standing. "I sent the materials last night," I said. "The numbers?" He held up a palm. "This isn't about numbers. It's about signal. You were late to a meeting with a client in the room. That signal says I can't trust you." "I was 9 minutes late," I said too quickly. "There was... Stop." He breathed through his nose, slow like a doctor about to deliver a diagnosis. He considered the patient's fault. "This company is not a rescue mission for your personal life. If you want to play hero, Do it on your own time. Heat climbed the back of my neck. I wasn't. He moved on without me. Effective immediately. You're off the quarter-end review. Jonathan will take point. You'll support from the bench. And before you ask, yes, that affects your bonus weighting. It took a second for the words to land. The review was the only thing propping my year's math upright. Jonathan hasn't touched the account, I said. Then consider this an opportunity for him to develop and for you to reflect. He clicked his pen once. At 11:30, you'll meet with HR. There will be a formal note to acknowledge today's lapse. Sign it, and we move on. Refuse, and we consider this insubordination. What does the note say? That you were late and that you understand punctuality is a condition of employment. Don't make this bigger than it is. He let the silence expand until I could hear the squeal of a stapler out in the bullpen. I pictured the shoulder of the highway, the jack, her cold fingers. It felt absurd to try to cram that morning into a checkbox labeled lapse. Is that all? I asked. For now, he said. Close the door on your way out. By the time I reached my desk, the chat icon was blinking with the ugly insistence of someone tapping your forehead. Sales team thread. Jonathan, anyone have latest procurement notes from Halberd? Jules. Evan's deck has him if he ever shows up on time again, lol. Lydia. Not cool. Jonathan. Joking, relax. I closed the window before I could type something I'd regret. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, then stopped, then buzzed again. Voicemail. Across the aisle, Jules swiveled toward me, a smirk tucked away like a candy under her tongue. Rough morning, she said. Go sell something, I said, too tired to coat it in sugar. She rolled her eyes and turned back to her pipeline spreadsheet, where everything was 90% likely until it wasn't. At 11:27, I walked into HR's glass box. Tasha was waiting with a laptop and a paper I already knew I would hate. She had the careful calm of someone who has seen far worse than me and intends to keep her boundary between empathy and liability. This is straightforward, she said, rotating the screen. Attendance, expectations, acknowledgement. You can add a comment if you want context. I was late because I stopped to help someone with a flat, I said, and as the words came out, I heard how small they sounded, how easily they fit into the drawer labeled excuses. Tasha's eyes softened an inch. That's decent of you, she said. But policy is policy. You can write that in this box. She tapped the comment field. Ben's already added his note. I scrolled. Chronic lateness pattern, he'd typed. 2 instances in 6 months, both 5 minutes, now upgraded by rhetoric into a pattern. I swallowed the sting and typed, stopped to assist a stranded driver on the highway in unsafe conditions. Arrived late. Accept responsibility. Tasha read it, nodded once. Sign and we can move forward. Does move forward include losing the quarter-end review? I asked. She closed the laptop an inch. Staffing decisions are manager discretion, she said. The way you say weather happens. My advice? Keep your head down this week. Back at my desk, my monitor had bloomed with new assignments, the kind that accumulate when people smell blood. Scrub 3 data pulls, reconcile 2 client billing anomalies, draft templated follow-ups no one reads, the kind of work that eats days and leaves no fingerprints. At 1:15, Ben did what he loved most, a stand-up that required everyone to stand, because discomfort is a management style. We circled near the whiteboard while he planted himself in the doorway like a sentry. Jonathan performed confidence about the review he hadn't earned. Ben nodded along, then pivoted. Teachable moment, he announced. He didn't look at me, which made it worse. When we say 9, we mean 9. Our clients buy certainty. If you can't provide it, your brilliance is irrelevant. A few chuckles, a cough. Lydia stared at the floor. I stared at the knot in the carpet where someone's chair had carved a permanent crescent. Afterwards, she sidled up, voice barely above the hum of the AC. You okay? I'm fine, I said, which was a lie and a reflex. She hesitated. I heard a thing, she whispered. Sharon's boss is visiting Thursday. There's talk of consolidating vendors. Halberd's review may decide who survives the next quarter. Good to know, I said. It was also good to know that Ben had removed me from the meeting invite 15 minutes ago. My calendar showed a neat gray line where my blue had been. I clicked the old thread to see if anyone noticed. No one had. At 2:40, the unknown number called again. I stepped into the stairwell for air that smelled like paint and damp concrete, and answered. "Evan?" a woman's voice asked. The acoustic echo made it feel like a confession booth. "Yes." "I'm calling from a number that won't make your phone auto-bounce me into a receptionist queue," she said. "It's Mara." The word struck like a thrown pebble. Small, direct, impossible to ignore. Highway, rain, spare tire, the light on her phone under my hands. For a second I said nothing. The stairwell hummed. "Are you okay?" I asked, which felt idiotic given that she was the one calling me. "I am," she said. "Because of you. I made my meeting." A pause. I wanted to say thank you where it would reach you, not get lost between signatures. "You're welcome," I managed. Another pause. "Also," she added, voice shifting into the crisp cadence I recognized from boardrooms, "I have a follow-up downtown tomorrow at 10. If you're free after, I'd like to return the favor." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Maybe not," she said, and I could hear the smile that didn't reach her eyes this time. "But I still want to." Paper rustled on her end. "What's your last name, Evan?" I told her. She repeated it like she was pressing it into memory. Thanked me again, and the line clicked quiet. Back at my desk, Ben was at my chair, flipping through my notebook without asking, mouth curled like he'd caught me hiding something. "We need updated churn models by EOD," he said, "and fix the language on slide 8. Sharon flagged it as overfamiliar." I looked at the note in the margin. Reduce second-person voice. The only part of the deck that sounded like me. I nodded. He stared a beat longer than necessary, sniffing for defiance, found none, and moved on. The rest of the afternoon came in files and left in fragments. I answered every email with a surgeon's economy. I rebuilt slide 8 until it read like it had been authored by a committee afraid of adjectives. I drafted the churn model twice, once with optimism, once with honesty, and sent the honest one because somewhere between the highway and here, my appetite for theater had thinned. At 6:12, the floor was mostly quiet. Lydia shrugged on a coat and squeezed my shoulder. "Don't let him make you small," she said, then vanished into the elevator. I sat with the hum of lights and the distant clatter of the cleaning crew's cart, hands hovering over the keyboard, that morning's rain still faint on the cuff of my shirt like a watermark. I opened my inbox to send one last update and saw a new message rise to the top, subject line blank. Sender blocked by the kind of privacy setting only executives use. I clicked it open, jaw clenched, eyes scanning for the next blow, ready or not. By the time the clock bled past 7, the office had hollowed out to whispers and the drag of chairs against carpet. I sat alone, the glow of my monitor painting my desk in sterile blue. The email with the blank subject line was still open, waiting for me to breathe enough courage into my fingers to scroll. My chest felt like a locked box. The message was short, just 2 sentences. "Mr. Evan, I believe you were the one who helped me this morning. I would like to meet again, properly." No signature, just an attached calendar invite. 10 a.m., conference room 12. The sender's domain was blocked by privacy shields, but the weight behind the words pressed on me like stone. I read it twice, 3 times. My mind looped. Mara. Her name had stayed in the stairwell, echoing. Her voice on the phone, low, measured, the kind you don't forget. I closed the laptop harder than I meant to, the clap startling in the empty space, and sat there listening to the building's bones creak. Sleep was a rumor that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the rain hitting her hair, the way her hands had trembled, the suitcase with the badge clipped to the handle. The humiliation from earlier replayed in jagged bursts, Ben's smirk, the chuckles from sales, Jonathan preening like a borrowed suit, but woven through it was the memory of her gratitude. It clung like the smell of asphalt after rain. When morning came, the city felt raw, every street sharper than usual. I buttoned a fresh shirt, polished shoes until they looked like lies, and walked into the office early for once. The bullpen smelled of burnt coffee and toner. Lydia lifted her eyes, surprised, and gave me a quick nod. That was half encouragement, half pity. At 9:59, I was standing outside conference room 12, palms sweating despite the chill from the vents. The blinds were drawn, but a shadow moved inside. I pushed the door open. She was there, Mara. The red blouse was gone, replaced by a tailored suit, the color of storm clouds, but her presence hit just the same. She stood when she saw me, that same suitcase by her side, now neat and whole, as if the chaos of the highway had never happened. "Evan," she said, and the way she said my name felt deliberate. Waited. "Mara," I managed, voice too thin. Her smile was small but real. "I wanted to thank you again. Yesterday could have gone very badly for me. You didn't have to stop, but you did, and it made all the difference." I shrugged, awkward. "Anyone would have." Her eyes sharpened. "No, that's the thing. Almost no one does. Not anymore." She gestured to the table. We sat. Her hands rested on the suitcase, fingers tapping lightly against the latch. I could see her badge again, clear this time. The logo of Halberd Industries, the client at the center of our quarter-end review. My stomach flipped. "You work with Halberd," I said. It wasn't a question, but my voice betrayed it anyway. "I am Halberd," she corrected, calm. "Regional director. Yesterday I was on my way to negotiate the final terms of a consolidation deal, the kind that changes the direction of companies." The air in the room seemed to thicken. My throat went dry. "And you," she continued, leaning slightly forward, "were the man on the shoulder of the road who made sure I got there." I swallowed. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." She studied me a moment longer, then softened. "You just helped. That's rare. And it's why I asked to see you here. Not just to thank you, but to ask, will you be in the review on Thursday?" The question cut deeper than she realized. I shifted in my chair. I was removed from it. Ben reassigned lead to Jonathan. Her brows arched, the faintest sign of displeasure. "Removed? After yesterday?" I laughed once, hollow. Let's just say my boss values punctuality over context. For a heartbeat, she didn't speak. Her gaze flicked to the table, then back to me, sharp as a blade in its sheath. "Interesting." I felt the weight of something unsaid, coiled between us. She gathered her papers, slid them back into the suitcase, and stood. "Thursday," she said, meeting my eyes with a steadiness that pinned me to the chair. "Be there, please." And with that, she was gone, heels striking the floor in measured beats, suitcase rolling like a drumbeat of inevitability. I sat frozen, pulse racing, the echo of her words vibrating through me. Be there, as if it were already decided, as if she knew something I didn't. When I finally left the room, Lydia caught me in the hallway, eyebrows raised. "What was that about?" I shook my head, unable to put it into words. "Maybe," I whispered, "maybe the tide's turning." But deep inside, I felt the storm gathering. Thursday came with the weight of a trial. The sky was too blue, the kind of clear that feels staged, like the city had been scrubbed for the sake of witnesses. I rehearsed nothing. There was nothing left to prepare. My deck was already in Ben's hands, my role officially cut to support. But Mara's voice kept circling in my skull. "Be there, please." Conference room 9 was glass-walled, bright with the indifferent glare of overhead fluorescence. When I walked in, every chair was already occupied. Ops, sales, finance, legal. Sharon sat near the head of the table, lips painted sharp. Jonathan stood at the screen, puffed up in a suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders, flipping through my slides as if they were his inheritance. And at the center of it all, Ben, leaning back, hands folded, the king of this fluorescent kingdom. Mara was there too. She'd arrived early, her presence reshaping the room's gravity. Today her suit was charcoal, her hair tied back, every movement precise. She glanced at me when I entered, a flicker of acknowledgement, then returned her gaze to the table. No warmth, no rescue, just patience, as though she knew how the scene needed to play out. Ben's eyes found me instantly. His smile was all teeth. "Well, look who decided to show," he said. "Careful, Evan. Wouldn't want the client thinking lateness is a habit." A ripple of chuckles skated around the table. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice even. "I was invited." "By who?" Ben asked, tilting his head. "Not by me." The silence stretched just long enough for everyone to shift in their seats. Jonathan cleared his throat and tapped the clicker. "If we can—" "Not yet," Ben cut in, eyes still on me. "Since you're here, Evan, why don't you explain to the room why we should entrust this deal to someone who can't even arrive on time to his own meetings?" The jab landed heavier than it should have, not because of the words, but because of the audience. Every eye on me, every judgment rehearsed. Sharon smirked into her notes. Jonathan froze, halfway between a slide transition and an apology he wasn't brave enough to make. I drew a breath. I was late because I stopped to help someone stranded on the highway. My voice was steady, though my chest burned. 9 minutes. That's the context. Ben laughed once, sharp. "You hear that? 9 minutes. Do you think Halberd is in the business of waiting 9 minutes for anything? Do you think they care about your noble Samaritan act when millions of dollars are on the line?" The room buzzed with nervous laughter, the kind people use to protect themselves from choosing sides. I felt the heat creep up my neck. "Sit down," Ben ordered, finally turning away, dismissing me with a flick of his hand. "Jonathan, continue." But Mara spoke before the slide could advance, calm, precise. "Actually, I'd like to hear more from Evan." The air froze. Heads turned. Ben's smile faltered, only slightly, but enough for me to see the crack in his armor. "With respect," he said quickly, leaning forward, "Evan is not the lead on this account. He's had performance issues. That's why Jonathan is presenting today." Her eyes flicked to Ben, then back to me. And for a moment I saw the highway again. The rain, the trembling hands, the gratitude. But she gave nothing away. "Still," she said smoothly, "I value hearing from all perspectives. Let him speak." I swallowed the lump in my throat. The deck was mine. Every slide born of sleepless nights. Numbers carved out of spreadsheets until my eyes bled. Jonathan's hand hovered over the clicker, unsure whether to move or freeze. "Slide 7, I said quietly. He clicked. I stood, palms damp, the glass wall reflecting me back like an imposter. But as I began to explain the churn model, the logic, the projections, the risks, I felt the room shift. The numbers were mine. The story was mine. Every word landed because it was lived, not borrowed. Ben's jaw tightened. He interjected once, twice, each time with a correction that wasn't one, each time thinner, sharper. "What Evan means is," or "that's an oversimplification." But the more he interrupted, the more the eyes around the table drifted to Mara, who remained silent, watching, listening. When I finished, the silence that followed wasn't cruel this time. It was heavy, expectant. Mara nodded once, deliberate. "Thank you, Evan." Then, turning to Ben, her voice cooled another degree. "I see why his perspective matters." Ben forced a chuckle. "Of course. Team effort. That's what we pride ourselves on here." But the sheen in his eyes had dimmed, his control fraying. The meeting pressed on, but the air had changed. Jonathan stumbled twice, sweating through his collar. Ben's interruptions grew more desperate, each one landing flat. And through it all, Mara's gaze never wavered, calm, unreadable, like a judge waiting for the defense to hang itself. By the end, when the final slide blinked onto the screen, I knew something irreversible had shifted. The storm hadn't broken yet, but you could feel the pressure in the air, the kind that makes the world hold its breath. The room didn't empty after the last slide. It hardened. People stayed seated the way juries do when they know the verdict is coming from somewhere above them. Ben held his smile with the effort of someone clenching a fist behind his back. Jonathan focused on the clicker like it might save him if he pressed it hard enough. Mara closed her folder. The leather made a soft, final sound. "Thank you," she said, and for a second it wasn't clear if she meant me, the team, or the universe for arranging traffic and weather exactly as it had. "Before we talk numbers, I want to talk about fit." "Absolutely," Ben said, relief rushing to fill the space like water finding a crack. "Culture fit is core to our—" She didn't look at him. "At Halberd, when we choose vendors, we look for three things: competence, alignment, and signal." Her gaze swept the table. "Competence is the math. Alignment is the ethics. Signal is what you show me when you think I'm not looking." Sharon crossed her legs. Someone in ops took a breath and held it. Ben's smile chilled a degree. "You'll find out we excel on all three." Mara's eyes moved to me for the briefest beat, and then back to Ben. "Yesterday morning, on an unsafe shoulder under an overpass, one of your staff chose to stop and help a stranger, rather than shave 3 minutes off his commute. Today, in a glass room, I watched a manager convert that into a weapon." The air compressed. The fluorescence hummed louder. Ben let out a soft laugh that died too quickly. "With respect, you're making assumptions. Punctuality is a proxy for reliability," she said, still calm. "Not a substitute for judgment." "Evan," she turned to me, "what did you say? 9 minutes." I nodded once, unsure what truth would cost or pay now. 9. "And you, Ben, removed him from the review because of those 9 minutes?" "I reassigned based on overall performance," Ben replied, voice slick. "We have patterns here. We coach. We allocate." "That's leadership." Mara's mouth did a small, contained thing that wasn't a smile. "I see." She reached into her bag and slid a thin folder across the table toward Sharon. The Halberd logo, embossed, caught the light like a quiet bell. "This is our consolidation brief. It was drafted before yesterday. It names your firm as the front runner." Even Jonathan stopped breathing. Ben leaned forward, hands steepled, all performance. "We appreciate the confidence. I'm confident we'll—" "But the brief is not the contract," Mara said. "It is a recommendation subject to final conditions." Sharon scanned the first page, then looked up. "What conditions?" Mara's eyes went to the glass wall and back, as if she were checking the reflection for a ghost. "We will not give our business to a team that punishes the exact behavior we want near our systems. We move fast. We have crises. We want people who will stop for 9 minutes when it matters, not pretend those minutes are the end of the world." Ben's jaw flickered. "We don't punish kindness. We simply require discipline." "You punish signal," she said. "You punish the one thing I watched for today." She let that hang, then added, "And you misrepresented credit?" Ben blinked. "Excuse me?" "Slide 7, she said. "The churn model. The framing that accounts for our legacy contracts and their weird grace periods. That isn't something you crib from a white paper. That's the fingerprint of the person who sat up at 2 a.m, living inside our numbers." Her gaze touched Jonathan, then moved to me, then settled deliberately on Ben. "In this room, the only person who spoke that fingerprint was the one you demoted." No one moved. Through the glass, a pair of assistants walked by with a stack of bottled water, and slowed when they felt the temperature. Ben's voice changed. It got light again, like helium. "We're a team. Ideas are shared." "Credit is not a buffet," Mara said. "You don't get to choose what looks good and leave the rest on someone else's plate." She turned to Sharon. "Condition 1. If we proceed, Evan is the point of contact and lead for Halberd's review and integration. Not support. Not bench. Lead." Sharon's expression barely shifted, but her pen hovered. "And condition 2? Mara took her time. The moment had the quiet of a stage right before the trapdoor opens. "Condition 2. We do not work with managers who confuse authority with value. I don't care what his title is on your org chart. If he's in the chain between us and delivery, we pass. For a second, the room failed to process the grammar. Then it did all at once. Someone coughed in a way that was also a laugh and then choked it down. Jonathan said, "Whoa," under his breath, too loud. Lydia, wherever she was behind the glass, had stopped walking. Ben's face did 100 faces in a second and landed on outraged calm. "This is highly irregular. Only if you expected the past to keep paying interest," she said. "I'm not here for theater." She stood. "We have 3 other firms who can do your math. I am here because of yesterday morning and because of what I saw when I gave you the chance to show me who you are." Ben looked to Sharon like a drowning man looks for a ladder. "You can't be serious." Sharon had her legal face on, the one that means she is already cataloging precedent. "Halberd may set conditions," she said evenly. "We can counter. We can discuss." "We can," Mara allowed, "but not about the second condition. That one is binary." She lifted her bag. "We'll step out for 15. When I return, either you've aligned or we're calling Kinsley and Rowe. They've been very eager." She gave me the lightest nod. "Evan, if they align, I'll expect your calendar hold by end of day." Then she walked out, the room warping in her wake like heat. For a full breath, no one spoke. Then the noise crashed in. Whispers, throat clearing, the rhythm of panic disguised as logistics. Ben stood too fast, knocking his chair so it clipped the wall. "Everyone out," he snapped. "Now!" Chairs scraped. Jonathan fumbled with the clicker like he needed it to unlock the door. People streamed past me without looking, the way you avoid eye contact at a fire drill. When the room was down to 3, Ben, Sharon, me, Ben rounded on her. "You can't possibly consider letting a client dictate staffing." Sharon didn't flinch. "They're dictating outcomes. We're the ones who made staffing the obstacle." He turned to me. There was a new thing in his eyes. Not anger, not yet fear, but the look of someone meeting a mirror he didn't order. "You set this up." I stared at him, tired enough to be honest. "I changed a tire." He laughed, a brittle sound that made the glass vibrate. "You think you're the hero in this story because you got lucky at an underpass?" "I think she watched you turn 9 minutes into a morality play," I said, "and she didn't like the sermon." He took a step closer, voice lowering. "If you think I'm going to hand you my account because you found a halo on the highway..." Sharon cut across him, calm as always. "Benin." She gave us 15 minutes. He looked at the clock like it had betrayed him. "We won't be extorted." "We'll be unemployed if we're proud," she said, not unkind. "This deal is payroll for 2 quarters. She turned to me. "Step outside, Evan." I did. The hallway felt colder. Through the glass, I watched mouths move and hands carve shapes in the air. Ben's shoulders rose, fell, rose. Sharon didn't move much at all. She has that gift, the stillness that makes other people calculate themselves into corners. Lydia appeared at my elbow with 2 paper cups. "Water," she said. "It's what they give the condemned and the victorious." I took one. "Which am I?" "Ask me in 14 minutes. We stood there, watching the room talk around its own reflection. The floor's ambient sounds took over. The distant thud of a copier, the soft whir of vents, the click of a shoe that had lost its rubber tip. Past and future hung between 2 panes of glass, waiting for someone to decide which one they preferred. The door opened at 12 minutes. Ben walked out first, eyes like polished stone, face smoothed to corporate neutral. Sharon followed, then paused beside me. "We're making an adjustment," she said. "There will be a new lead on Halberd. You'll receive the formal notice in writing. Mara will be informed." Ben didn't look at me. He looked at the carpet, then the ceiling, then nowhere in particular, as if the building might offer arbitration. "Don't gloat," he said, voice quiet enough that only I could hear. "You have no idea what you've just made yourself responsible for." "I know," I said. "It's 9 minutes." He flinched in a way that would have been imperceptible if I hadn't known him for 3 years. Sharon's phone buzzed. She checked the screen, then nodded toward conference room 9. "They're back." We walked in together. Mara was standing by the glass, looking out at the city like it was a map. She turned when the door clicked. Sharon spoke for us. "We aligned to your conditions." Mara's gaze moved from her to me to Ben and back. "Noted." She picked up her pen. "Let's proceed." The pen made that soft sound again, and then the room shifted from verdict to terms, from theater to work, from signal to consequence. The way mornings become afternoons, with or without your permission. The way 9 minutes on the shoulder becomes something no one can subtract from you again. The contract was signed 2 weeks later. Halberd didn't hesitate. Mara's pen carved the future into paper with the same precision she'd shown in the conference room. The deal meant millions in revenue, months of security, and headlines that made the board smile. But what mattered wasn't in the press release. It was in the shift of air every time I walked through the office. People looked up now. They said my name instead of mumbling it. Sales stopped cracking jokes about lateness. Lydia high-fived me one morning. A quiet thank you folded into the slap of her palm. Even Jonathan, stripped of his borrowed spotlight, muttered a grudging, "Nice work," before retreating into spreadsheets. Ben? He became a ghost, still haunting his own chair. Stripped of Halberd, stripped of the account that had been his crown, he spent his days in meetings that didn't matter, scribbling notes no one asked for. His voice lost its weight. The chuckles that once followed his barbs no longer came. People heard him, but they didn't listen. One evening, as the office thinned, he cornered me by the elevators. His tie was loose, eyes rimmed with red. "You think you won?" he said, voice low. "I didn't win," I said. "The company did." He shook his head, a bitter laugh breaking. "Don't dress it up. You took everything." The elevator dinged. I stepped inside, held the door with my hand. "No, Ben, you handed it away." The doors closed on the silence he couldn't fill. Mara kept in touch. Not often. She was too busy steering her side of the deal. But enough. A call every few weeks. An email with a note. Good judgment scales. Once she even stopped by unannounced, suitcase in hand, nodding at me across the bullpen like the highway was still between us. The real reward wasn't a promotion, though one came. It wasn't the title change, though that came too. It was the quiet understanding that sometimes the smallest decision, the 9 minutes you spend on a shoulder in the rain, rewrites the story others will tell about you. On the day the deal went public, Sharon pulled me aside. "Funny thing," she said, handing me a copy of the press release. Ben submitted a draft with his name all over it. The board sent it back. Mara had already called them. I smiled, not because of the win, but because of the symmetry. He had spent years teaching me that signal mattered, that appearance was everything, and in the end, the signal that mattered most was a simple one, stopping when no one else would. That night, walking home under a clean sky, I thought of the overpass, the hiss of rain, the jack-biting metal, Mara's voice saying, "You're going to be late for whatever you were racing to." She had been right. I had been late, and it had cost me something. But it had also given me everything.